Hey guys, OGalbina here, bringing you guys another Draft League Twitter discussion. Today, I want to go over a discussion I put up a good couple weeks ago, but as you guys have probably known, and as many of you guys are new players, the Draft League scene has absolutely exploded in this past year, and because that's the case, we obviously have a ton of new players. So this is another yearly Twitter discussion I like to do where I kind of put out there's a lot of, mutuals I have on Twitter and things like that that have been playing for a long time. And I said, hey, is there any advice you would have for new players starting out in the format and things like that, whether it be play-wise, whether it be mindset-wise and things like that. So we're going to go over those today. We have a lot of replies, so we're going to try and get through them pretty quickly. If you guys do enjoy today's Draft League Twitter discussion, be sure to drop a like in the video, as well as subscribe to the channel. We are on our way to 3,000 and we're just about 50 away. I mean, again, if everybody who watches this video drops a sub, we should hit it today and it'd be a great Christmas present for me. So I would really appreciate it a ton. And yeah, with that being said, I'm sorry if I sniffle a little bit. It's cold. I have a cold. I'm drinking coffee. I'll do my best, okay? There's always that one guy that gets really upset when I sniffle. But regardless, let's go ahead and take a look. So my suggestion to new players, and this is something I like to harp a lot, is I'll just read off word for word, then I'll explain a little bit. My own is know when to predict or, make a play. Just because you think someone will make a certain play doesn't mean you need to act on it. You should only make that prediction if, one, there's little to zero downside if you get the play wrong, or two, you need to make the play in order to win the game. I always say this very often. Whenever I watch players who are much, much better than me at the game, I notice they don't make as many doubles. They don't make as many predictions and things like that each and every turn. And despite this being the case, they win more consistently. It's because they're putting themselves in positions where they don't need to make aggressive reads to win the game. Now, you might be in a position where you could say, okay, I think that this, say I have a Victinian, right? And Reggie Steele is out. And I'm like, man, I really think that they're going to go into my Logic right here, so I really want a Bolt Strike. But if they don't make that play and they're, Akaberry plus Thunderwave, do I lose the game if I make that play wrong? Yes, maybe I should make that play then, if that's the case. Or maybe it's a sense of, I don't switch into this Victini, I want to punish an over prediction. Do I get punished and lose the game if I make that prediction? I guess the Akaberry example isn't a great one, because then it would Thunderwave you anyways. But that kind of idea, right? In the sense that if I get this play wrong, does it put me in a disadvantageous spot to potentially just raw lose the game? If the answer is yes, you probably should not make the play unless you're in a position where I need to make this play to get back in this game and win the game, right? Then, obviously, you got to take some risk and do some things. But, again, the better players that I see, they aren't making predictions very often. Unless they're in a position where, okay, I get this wrong, I should be okay. Now, next up, we have Seabad here saying, it can take time to get good. I speak from experience. Maybe a hot take, but also another one is maybe a hot take, but team building is infinitely harder than battling. If you don't have the right team, it doesn't matter how well you read your opponent. I think both of these are really true. A lot of times people get in a draft and they do 2 or 3 seasons, even 4, 5, 6, and they don't make playoffs once. And it's really frustrating. I totally get that. And not wanting to play anymore makes sense, because it's very frustrating committing that much time to a different metagame. But keep in mind the people you're playing with have been playing for years and years and years. I mean, I have almost 1,000 Draft League games in my career, right? And some people have even more, but even the case of you're on your 50th Draft League game, someone's on their 500th, they're going to have a little bit more knowledge in the reserves than you, and you might struggle initially. But I think that's the fun part of draft, just the grind and getting better. I wouldn't have fun if I won every single game. As much as I try to win every single game, if I won every game, is that fun, right? The whole point is the grind and getting better and things like that. So I think that's really important to note is, yes, sometimes you're going to suck, and it might be for the first year or two you play the format, but enjoy the process and enjoy the grind. Don't be so narrow-sighted on the results, I guess. I definitely do agree, too, that team building is harder than battling, especially building you might build a great team for the specific team that you think is going to come, but building a cohesive team that can deal with, infinite different possibilities that can come out and different, a ton of different team compositions and things like that is very, very hard. You can be a great player, but you're always going to be at a severe, severe disadvantage if you have a really shitty team. So that's definitely true. And then, I like this one too. Also learn nature too. Weather, speed control. I think especially weather. I always tell new people, I think using like Rain offense in your first or second league is a great idea. It's a team that has a very like structured, this is what I do, this is what I get in, this is how I win, and it really teaches you the basic concepts of draft really, really well. Resource management, knowing I can't sack my Pelipper because then my Swampert, my Mega Swampert, and my Kingdra suck, so I can't sack this yet. I need to know what I pivot into X, how I ensure that I don't get caught off guard with random Thunderbolts, Electro Balls, and things like that from Cinderace, right? So it really teaches you to look in depth in the builder, keep around your resources, be smart in that regards, get good hazard control because you don't want your Pelipper to take rocks and you want to run Damp Rock, making sure that you have good momentum and good pivots to get into these Rain Breakers and Sweepers and things like that, using good offensive positioning, good defensive positioning, things like that. I really do actually recommend, if you're like really starting out, try out Rain. I think Rain's a great way of teaching basic concepts. Rain gets a little bit worse the more you play and like the better players you play because it's a very one-dimensional playstyle, but it's okay to learn a one-dimensional playstyle when you're first starting out, right? So I definitely think it's a really cool idea. Next up, we have JCM, who's a very, very solid player in his own right. He doesn't have a Twitter, but he went ahead and gave me this on Discord, so I figured I'd read it out. Number one, he said, I do have advice for new players wanting to improve. Number one is you got to be willing to go back and watch/think about your old matches and drafts and ask yourself what you could have done better. If you're not sure what you could have done better, try and get an outside perspective or ask someone more experienced who's willing to go over with you. And if you don't know anyone, try and join some servers and ask around, but avoid asking in larger general chats. I think this is a very important thing. A lot of times people really, really do play a game, they lose, they're like, I should have done this, and they're done. Now, I think going over your replays in your games, I've watched so many of my games so many times, not just the wins, because the wins are great to watch, right? You feel good. You just whoop someone's ass, you're like, man, I'm going to watch that again. Look at this double, look at this positioning, but watching the game where you got smoked is important to make sure that you're improving and knowing what you did wrong and things like that. So, I definitely agree. I agree, keep out of like large general chats, like servers with like 1,000 people in it and be like, what did I do wrong? Because you're going to get some shitters who, kind of critique you for no reason. You're going to have people who talk just to talk. But if you can get good players, you can get friends who play in the format and be like, hey, what do you think I did wrong? Even if they're not objectively correct, I think it's important to like go over things like that. So yeah, definitely good. And then I'm going to open this just to like be able to read the whole thing, and then I'll close it so it's a better view for you guys. But we also have process/improvement is greater than results. Having a learning mentality over a process-based one makes a huge difference in not only taking that step forward, but also enjoyment of the game. Mentality is massive. I've seen a lot of people beat themselves up mentally for mistakes, and it not only affects their play, but also their enjoyment or even their mental state. As someone who struggles with this personally, I think this is a great piece of advice. Again, I just harped on a little bit earlier, enjoying the process, and, enjoying the grind and understanding like, hey, this is a process. I'm trying to get better each and every game I play is a really important thing. And I think that's something I didn't mention is the fact that you'll just not be as upset. Again, this is coming from someone who really struggles with that. And when I lose, I really beat myself up over it. And again, you have to end at the end of the day, it's a video game. So again, this is something I've been trying to work on for years, whether it be with, draft league, or even when I was still, playing sports and I was an athlete with baseball and stuff like that. I really struggle with it, and I think that's really important because it lets you really take things into perspective a little bit easier. You're not going to be upset. You're not going to be in a shitty mood after you lose a Pokemon game, but also you'll be able to approach the game and do that replay analysis and look back. What did I mess up on with a much clearer mind state? So I think that's a great advice here from JCM, and obviously a very good player. So it's always good to get good advice from players like that. Next up, we have another mindset one here from Bread Pudding. Mindset is half the battle in Draft League. Don't compare yourself to more prominent players such as Pokeaim. Know that you are brave for just trying such a vigorous format. If you have a terrible mindset and quit after your first league, you're setting yourself up for failure. Yeah, I guess this kind of touches on the thing. I guess another thing that Bread here added was the sense of don't compare yourself to other people. Again, people have been playing this format for a ridiculous amount of time. People have been playing competitive Pokemon in general for a ridiculous amount of time. Everybody grows at different rates. Everybody learns at different rates. I guarantee you, even if you are the worst player in your league right now, in a year, 2 years, whatever, if you keep grinding at it, you can 100% be one of the better players in the format. It is not that insanely difficult of a format to where you cannot grind and get much, much better at it. So I think that's definitely a good idea. Don't compare yourself to other people because there's always going... And also, this is something... and I don't mean this in a mean way, but there's literally always someone who is better than you at something. Unless you are the literal top person in that, regard, which chances are you are not. There's always someone better than you. Now, don't take that as I'll never be the best. No. strive for it. And that's just to like show that, hey, it's okay if X person is better than you. That doesn't mean you're not good, and that doesn't mean that you cannot get better, because when you become better and you get better than that person, there's someone above you, and it's always something to chase after. So I think that's really important. There's a lot of mindset ones, which I think is an important thing with draft, because it is such a slog. So I'm glad that people are kind of mentioning that. Next up, we have Satirical Blade here saying, there are lots of help in forms of docs or people telling you that you need X type or Y role. Well, and while they aren't necessarily wrong in that instance, you should understand that a good draft needs is its own vision and how it wins on different matchups. I mean, yeah, as long as you have an idea and a game plan going into things, I think that's fair. I think that there are certain rules that you really should have. And things like that, making sure you have, resistances to X and ways of dealing with this and ways of dealing with prominent threats in the format. But I've also seen guys like Amel who just simply will go an entire draft without a water and a ground resist, and he'll go 9-3 and make playoffs and win the championship. If it's something that you personally feel comfortable with, and I think that's the best way of putting this too. And I think I'm gonna divert a little bit from what Septile said here. I think making sure that you are comfortable with your draft, it could be the best draft in the league on paper, but if you do not like the playstyle, if you do not like the Pokemon, if you do not like how it functions, you are not going to play to the best of your ability. It's just not going to happen, right? So I think that's an important thing, is comfortability, making sure you're drafting a team that, one, is fun, and two, you feel, that you can use confidently. Next up, we had K Savage here. He says, use a damage calculator in prep. You won't always need max speed, and those leftover EVs can help you out to survive some important hits. It's the same with an attacking stat. You won't always need full investment for KOs. Always take hazards into account when doing your calcs too. So yeah, this is like a great, especially if you are first starting off. A lot of times, I know when I first started off, I didn't know what speed creeping is, and what speed creeping is say my opponent's fastest Pokemon is Azelf. My fastest Pokemon is Dragapult. I do not need to run max speed Dragapult because I just need to outspeed their fastest Pokemon. And then if I have enough EVs to outspeed that gives me a ton extra for my HP, for my defense, to run some different calcs to be able to live certain hits and things like that. Same thing as if I'm drafted a Kyurem Black and I am Freeze Dry, Earth Power, Roost Sub. I might want a little bit of bulk so I could live certain hits and keep my sub up against certain things. Plus, with my crazy attack or special attack stat, I guess Kyurem's a better example because Kyurem Black's probably banned. With my crazy special attack stat, I probably don't need to be max special attack, and it might be more advantageous to have 142 investment or something random. Obviously I'm just throwing a random number out there, but I do think that that's an important thing to note is EV optimization is really, really solid. So yeah, definitely a very good piece of advice there. Next up, we have Thriller here saying, I think some of the best advice is when you join, you want to do draft, just remember this is all games, so sometimes they don't always go your way. RNG and hacks is always going to be involved no matter what, so try and stay positive and have a good attitude, because in the end, it is just a game. Thriller's a very positive person, it's a very good person to, heart this. He's been playing for a long time, and I think that he's a very solid player, and but he's also a very positive player. Whenever I've noticed him in OGDL or the leagues he uploads and things like that, there's games where he'll get unlucky, because you will get unlucky in Pokemon. Again, this is something I struggle with personally. But understanding hey, it's out of your control. Don't get too upset, it's a video game, but also control the controllables, right? You can't control if you get crit. Now, you can put yourself in a position where crits don't matter, right? And that's the mark of a very good player. But sometimes you're just going to get crit and it's going to lose you the game, and it's going to suck. And again, as someone who struggles with this, I can tell you it really does suck. But take Thriller's advice, be like Thriller, be a little bit more positive, and understand, hey, shit happens, man. It really does happen. Next up, we have Shaman here saying, first, please don't be afraid to reach out to others for any type of advice. This community is one of the friendliest I've ever been a part of, and there's 99% chance anyone who asks will be more than happy to help. There's definitely a lot of people who are very, very, very kind and very willing to help out and things like that. I know on my server, there's a ton of people who help each other prep. I always try to help people out in the server and stuff like that, so definitely a good one here from Shaman. Second is going to be, if you truly wish to improve a draft, you have to put in the time just like anything else. That means putting time into your prep, studying games between players who are better than you, analyzing what you do right and wrong in your games. Yes, this kind of harps back on reviewing your own analysis, but again, just practicing, mocking if you have friends who also play, and mocking for your battles together, making sure you're putting app time building and stuff like that. It's just like any sport, any hobby. If you want to get good at something, you have to put in the effort to get good at it. So yeah. Third, please, for the love of God, be a respectful and responsive scheduler. Reach out to your opponents early, give specific dates and times that you are available. When you should decide to join a league, you are making a time commitment, so actually commit. This is fair. I feel the anger in Shay's voice here. I think that it is good practice to reach out before Wednesday and be like, hey, I can play these times. Personally, I like to schedule on Mondays because then I know going forward in the week when I need to be built, when I need to be ready, things like that. And he says right here, scheduling at times such as weekend are not only inefficient but disrespectful to your opponent. They also have lives that are trying to plan a schedule, implying they should just wait around for you is rude, and also actually show up to the time that you set. I think this is definitely fair. I think there's a lot of Johning in the Draft League community, so making sure that you're showing up on time and being a respectful schedule and realizing, hey, this might be when you're available and stuff like that, but this other person lives an entire separate life from you and they may not. So working with each other early is definitely going to be an important thing. Next up, we have Jacob here saying, learn while winning and losing. I can't preface that enough. While losing early can be a difficult pill to swallow, it can also be highly beneficial to growth, too. However, if one wins early on, the player needs to look and be critical of their play and team building as well. Yeah, we've kind of harped on this. Really, really study your replays, the ones you win, the ones you lose especially, and kind of recognize this is what I could have done better in this game. Not necessarily if I did this, I won, but recognizing if I do this better, I win, right? Or I could win. Next up, we have Razor Claw. He said, make sure you give some thought and prep to the low tier mons on your opponent's team, especially if they are very low tier, because if you don't, they could flatten you, especially if you verse me. We gotta get a little bit of a humble flex in here from Razor. But I definitely think this is an important thing, right? A lot of times we tunnel vision on the top end of the team, the Chien Paos, the Palafins, the Zamazenta Crowns, and you're like, oh shit, or the Tapu Kokos, and then at the bottom end of the team, you're like, oh shit, I ain't prepped for the Alolan Raichu. I lose to the Alolan Raichu. This thing smokes me, right? So it's definitely a really important thing. This is something I struggled. I don't think so anymore, but really early on in my career, I was the guy who got swept by the tier 4 mon in Gen 7 because I never built for it properly, and then I would get smoked by it. So this is definitely a very good point here by Razor. Next up, we have A12 saying, type synergies are overrated. Role synergies matter more in drafting. Like, if you're drafting Cacturne as your ground resist, you don't have a ground resist. Yeah, for sure. Think about the Pokemon you're drafting and their actual application that you're drafting them for. If you're drafting a really frail grass as your ground resist, you don't really have a ground resist because most EQs are going to come closer to it KOing you, and any coverage move is definitely going to. So I think that's really fair. There's a difference between having Cacturne as your ground resist and having Shaman as your ground resist, which is really fair. So don't draft for typings. Like, don't say, I need a grass type, I need a fire type, right? But also don't draft solely for resistances. Make sure those resistances are actually applicable and, do something, right? I don't want to draft a normal type that doesn't actually beat ghosts. There's no point, right? Because if I'm drafting as my ghost switch but it loses to ghost, why is it on my team? So that's a really, really good point from A12 there. Really good. Think about how your Pokemon's like, how each mon is applicable to the role that you're drafting them in. So, yeah. Shoutouts here saying, don't be afraid to test out new mons and playstyle you may be unfamiliar with. Even if you don't perform well, that's okay. Examine why it didn't work and you adapt. It's okay to have a bad season. There'll always be more. You can always improve. You can only improve and experiment and learn. This is a really good idea too, especially when you first start off, is experimenting with different playstyles, different Pokemon. A lot of times we really fall into drafting the same things at the same times. Always, because we're comfortable with it, but we don't know if there's something that we enjoy more. I know when I first started playing, I played Hyper Offense. I was, drafting Herder, this button, this click button, this click button. Then I slowly started experimenting with more bulky offense and balance, and I've even drafted Stall before. And I think I found my typical preferred playstyle is something in between balance and bulky offense. I can play all of these playstyles now though, because I've tried them out and I've used them multiple times. I also know what Pokemon I like because I've used them, right? I've used all of them, so I've gotten to the point in my career where I know what I don't want to draft and I won't draft it. But early on, you don't know if you like something or you hate something, right? There's no reason not to. So definitely a good piece of advice here from Shadow Stitch. I definitely super agree. Next up, we have Large here saying, try a different that's crazy, I didn't even read. This is Large saying pretty much the exact same thing that I said. Try different playstyles, figure out what fits for you. And if you don't like a playstyle and you think you're terrible with it, maybe give it another shot, but I think it's fair to be like, okay, I am not a stall player, I'm not a balance player, I'm not a hyper offense player, so don't play it. Next up is Kurt, really hopping on one that we've already talked about. You can see we're kind of rolling through a lot of these because they're all very similar. Rewatch your games, especially if you're starting out. Did I need to make this play? Was there something I missed this turn? Was I risking potential hacks here? Or did I have to? All really good hindsight questions. I like that he gave example questions, things to think about, right? Instead of just watching. If you're just watching, you're like, okay. And you watch again. You have to critically think about why you're watching, right? You have to actually, why do I have this opinion, or why why did I struggle here? Not I struggled here, let's watch. You know, I guess is a good way of putting it. So this is like actual things you can look for. Excuse me, when you're playing. So yeah. Next up, we have Soulblaze here saying, unless timer, use your time. Look up if the interaction you're about to enter is correct. Double check on the calculator. Search up facts and make sure what you're doing is going to work, at least the way you think it is. Rather lose on a confident play than win on ignorance. This is a good one from Soulblaze, actually. That's a very good tip. A lot of times people super rush through games, even when timer is on. You have plenty of time. You have a good minute and a half sometimes, depending on the timer and the format you're playing, even if it's on, right? So take your time. Understand what it is, and now keep like, you know, an eye on your timer and things like that. But calc and double check. You know, also know your calcs going in. I don't know if anybody says it later, but I'll leave that just in case, and if not, I'll bring that up later. But double check, make sure, okay, do I live 2 of these? If this thing sets up a Dragon Dance, what do I have that lives a hit after hazards on my team right now? Can I let it set up a Dragon Dance? How does Encore work with Substitute? How does, you know, these kinds of things. If you're like, okay, this one I'm going to click, but I want to make sure it works, it really sucks losing a game because you do not understand how an interaction works. So definitely a good idea, but I think a lot of it too comes from preparation beforehand, because if you know that going in, you're going to feel more confident, you're going to make the plays you need to make, right? Also, test things out if you're not sure about an interaction in prep, right? Get a friend, tell them to jump on, tell them to ring them on, and double check how the interaction goes. Next up here, we have Keegan saying, focus on how you can win the game instead of how to not lose the game. Yes, I think it's just win con recognition is a really important thing. How are you going to win? What is your win condition? How do you want to win? How do you see yourself winning? And what is going to get you to that position, right? How are you going to win with that X Pokemon, X set, and things like that? Do you need to get 30% off on this, 40% off on this? Make sure this thing isn't sashed. Scout and see if this is a Shukaberry, something like that. Opposed to playing defensively and saying, oh no, this is scary, oh no, this is scary, oh no, this is scary. Then you end up with a bunch of sponges and pivots for a game. And yeah, it might be a longer game, but how are you going to win that game? I guess is an important thing to note. So good one from Keegan here. Next up, we have Trexo here saying 9 Mons that are bringable every week will always be better than 12 Mons with some 1-point shitters. I think what he's saying is, this is interesting, because I personally think that top heavy is the way to go. I think drafting like 8 to 10 Pokemon, with most of them being higher tier Pokemon, like drafting some 4 or 5 pointers that are solid and give you value are important. I am a firm believer, though. I do agree in the sense that, like, if you're drafting like random 1-point trappage and stuff like that on your team, it sucks. But I feel like I only really see that in leagues that require you to draft 12. And if that's the case, I think you should just draft top heavy anyways and just get some 1-point shitters if you absolutely need to. It lets you work with more at the top end of the board, especially in such like a top heavy metagame like Paldea. But yeah, in general, I think this is definitely fair. You want everything on your team to be usable and have some kind of function on your team, and not just drafting these to draft them, I guess. But yeah, next up we have, I almost said Ian. We have Endless here. I guess it is still Ian, but it's weird calling him Ian. I've always called him Endless. But regardless, it's good to get creative, but don't be creative just for creativity's sake. Yes! Make sure your sets actually make sense in the matchup. It's better to bring a boring standard set that is strong on your opponent's team than off the wall one that only works 10% of the time. This is so important. I always talk about, I call it heat to be heat. Like, you're bringing heat just to have heat. Sometimes your best Landorus set isn't Calm Mind, it's just Scarf Landorus. It's just Rocky Helmet 3 attack Stealth Rock. It's boring, but if that's what... And again, if you really want to win with a certain set, nobody's saying you don't have to bring like the funny set, even if it's not optimal. Do what you want, but if your main concern is winning, don't think your way of winning is catching your opponent off guard. It's probably building a cohesive and solid team. So this is a good one here from Endless. Next up, we have Aaron12 here saying, the advice that I would give is be careful what part of the community you join. Some people will try and use you as a stepping stone to either catapult themselves / their league. Another decent advice that also given me is join leagues where, but I feel like this is just a personal one. I don't know. I wouldn't be worried. Just join leagues. If the league sucks, don't play in it again, right? I don't know. This seems like a very personal anecdote here. I'm sorry for whatever happened, but yeah, I don't know. Rolls from Marcus here. Don't draft for types, draft for rolls. Don't draft bad monsters, but don't draft bad monsters to fill roll. Roll compression is what you make of it. Yes, some mons are often more versatile, but each week you play against the biggest role in your mon's potential. Lots can be achieved with creativity plus calcs. So yeah, this is kind of what we talked about earlier with A12. drafting for, you know, this fits this role for me, this helps me out in this instance is important, but make sure you're not drafting ground versus cacturn, because he's not a ground resist, he's a cacturn. So good one for Marcus here. Definitely agree. TTM here saying get out while you can. I mean, it worked for these three guys, so maybe they're onto something. Oh no, we're gonna get to the Zazo ones. I have read the Zazo ones because they're very funny. Okay, I'm very excited for those. Next up, we have Liv here saying, do not look for help on prep or drafting of any kind until you know how to approach the game. If you don't know how you prefer to play a match, how can you expect anyone to know what the best course of action either is in draft plan or a team build? You'll just waste everyone's time. I get what Liv's saying. I don't know if I necessarily agree, because sometimes people giving you different ideas is important for you to figure out what works for you. Now, sometimes someone giving you draft advice, and like, say you come to me and you're like, should I draft Flygon or should I draft Mudsdale? And I tell you Mudsdale because I think it's better defensively on your team. You might play through the season and be like, man, I really wish I had Flygon. I think I would have played better with it. Then you know to draft Flygon next time. I think when you're early off in your career, getting advice from people isn't necessarily, I need to accept this advice, or this is objectively the best advice and I'm going to win. But I think it's an important way of, like, figuring out what it is you like and things like that. So I don't know if I agree with that one, Liv. I don't know. I could be driven. Sorry, I just got a text from work. Hee hee. Alright, next up we have Incog here saying, knowing what mons are going to be in a match and knowing how to play against them are two different concepts. Learning this unlocks so much. Knowing what mons are going to be in a match and knowing how to play against them are two different concepts. So I guess he's saying, like, knowing what's coming and how they are going to be played is two different things, and I guess that's fair. Like, you could say, like, Scarf is coming, I have a decent resist to Scarf. Like, say Scarf Landers, right, is coming, and I have a good switch into Scarf Landers. But if Scarf Landers U-turns and goes into something else, am I boned because of the momentum that allows, and the Pokemon that comes in for free, do I have an answer to that? So I guess it's understanding, like, how these Pokemon are being used in practice is the difference, and I think that's definitely fair. Next up, we have Gohan here saying, pay attention to where the opponent will leave themselves open when considering what they could bring against you, in particular combinations of mons and sets. So I guess that kind of plays into what we just talked about, right? And sequencing and understanding, okay, they have a switch-in, their switch-in is this. How do I exploit that, right? If I have a Pokemon with momentum and I force them out and I can Volt Switch and U-turn, am I in a good enough position to where I can get in something that really, you know, dents and makes a hole in their team or wins the game or something of that sort? So I think that's fair. It's kind of also recognition of, like, being able to understand what your opponent might end up bringing versus you because of, you know, what they're scared of and things like that, and how you can take advantage of that. Okay. Time for the Zazo tweets. First up, we have understand how bullying plays a role. Now, again, disclaimer, these are satire. Don't take them serious. Please, nobody yell at me. Understand how bullying plays a role in draft. In drafts, our personal worth is tied directly to our records and accomplishments, and typically there's a good chance that if you aren't winning in draft, you aren't winning in life, and morally, if you aren't publicly harassing loser idiots who suck. Help them understand their families can never accept them for who they are until they are recognized by the draft community. So true. My mom wouldn't talk to me until I got my first championship. Okay, next up is the difference between a good player and a great player is great players emphasize their nutrition. Put pineapples on their pizza for the best investment. You can do so for yourself, as statistically, not good players lack vitamin C content and they develop scurvy. I know I've never seen a pirate who's good at Draft League, personally, right? That's just me, though. And then lastly, another banger. Understand the draft community as a whole often lacks potential to strive for greatness. There's a saying, not even Batman could get that info out of me, which is referencing people who self-expose their deepest and darkest secrets, and yet we have some bangers such as, I also would love to know what he deleted. Thanks, Sazo. One of the greatest Draft League players of all time, giving you guys some really, really good advice here, so pay attention. Okay, back to some more serious ones. Next up, we have Orange here saying, play in a few leagues before you try and run one. Know the responsibilities of a league owner and put your community first. I mean, yeah, that's fair. I wouldn't expect someone who has never played draft to, like, run a super tight-knit league. But also, if you have a bunch of friends who have never tried before and you want to run a league, who cares? Like, I don't know. I feel like that's, again, this seems more personal than it does, like, a general statement. Speaking of personal, don't play Gen 9, go back to Gen 7, where it was peak Draft League. I do love me some Gen 7. I think Gen 9 is fun. I think once Terra goes away, it'll be even more fun. but you guys aren't ready for that conversation. Next up, we have PokeFan4125, aka Kenny, saying in certain matchup, you're going to have to bring more offensive team and game plan because your defensive mons can't switch in that well to your opponent's offense. So it's better to bring offense and try and force defensive checks to everything. Sometimes, it's something I sometimes struggle with. I talk about this all the time. And the biggest example, in my opinion, is Gen 7 Mega Mawile, right? I think Gen 7 Mega Mawile, and to an extent Gen 8 Urshifu, are Pokemon that really don't have great defensive counterplay typically, but they are exploitable offensively. Especially in the case of Mawile, it's slower. It's not frail, but it's not bulky. So in the sense that as long as you have mons that resist or live sucker and can threaten it immediately with fire, ground, all the different covers that, you can hit it with hard, it's not an overbearing and broken Pokemon. Or something like Hoopa. Nothing switches into Hoopa. Unbound, that is. Nothing switches into Hoopa Unbound, but it's exploitable with a mid-speed tier, the 4 times weakness to bug, and terrible physical defense. You can super exploit that, and there's a reason it's not a round 1 or 2 pick, because despite being ridiculously strong, you don't need to switch into it if you can kill it, right? And sometimes you're just going to have to position more offensively and, kind of check Pokemon more offensively. Live a hit, revenge kind of thing, which, you can definitely do. So, very, very good one here from Kenny. I think that's a great, great piece of advice. Next up here, we have Sharpie Plays saying, don't get upset if you're not immediately successful. Everyone has to start somewhere. The best part of the battle is the prep before it. Some newer people tend to over prep, so it's good to have someone prep with you and give you good balance and a mock battle. Yeah, just practice. Understand that you might suck when you first start. That's just life, baby. That's just life. When you start something new, you're not going to be very good at it. Next up, we have Naz here saying Draft Pulp. Yeah, that is the GOAT. That is the greatest Draft League Pokemon of all time. If you have not seen that video on what is the greatest Draft League Pokemon of all time, go watch it. Next up, we have Kat here saying, don't be too hard on yourself because of losses or bad season. It happens. Mentality is very important. It's not uncommon for people to let a silly draft game ruin both their mental in and outside of the game. Remember, it's just a game at the end of the day. Keep moving forward. Hell yeah. I agree, Kat. Again, it's something that I need to work on myself. So, for sure. Your self-worth isn't tied to a video game as much as it kind of feels like in the moment. Next up, we have Eric here saying, don't be afraid to get creative. Drafts is very different to standard singles and what's viable. Yeah, just because something would be really shitty in OU does not mean that it's a bad set in draft. And that's why Pokemon like Polt thrive. That's why Pokemon like Mew thrive in the format traditionally, because they are very versatile and we can do a lot of different things and do a lot of cool stuff. So definitely 100% the case. Very much so. And that's why you see a lot of versatile Pokemon being much better in draft than they are in Smog OU, I guess. Next up is Lux here saying, the easiest trap to fall into is tunnel vision. Tunnel visioning on a certain moment when drafting, a certain set when prepping, or even a certain scenario happening while playing is an easy way to get yourself into a bad position. Take a step back and consider some other options. Yes, 100%. I think especially when building your own team. We've already talked about tunnel visioning on top mons from your other opponent and what you think they're going to bring, but I think it's really important to recognize that you can tunnel vision on your own build. You look at a matchup, you say, this is what I want to win, right? And that's usually how I start building. I'll look at a matchup and I'll say, I think this wins, and I'm going to build around this winning. You might run some mocks and start just getting smoked. And in your head, you're like, okay, how do I get this win? How do I get this win? How do I get this win? You change the entire team around it without recognizing maybe there's a better set or maybe there's a better win con somewhere else, but I'm so tunneled on this winning because I thought it did, then now I have a really shitty team, and it's not my optimal build. So I think this is a really good one from Lux here. Next up, we have Anthony here saying, the best two advice I can give to newer players, not give up after having a losing streak, not getting too flustered for loss. Yep, tease grow from your mistakes. 100%. I don't want to harp on that too much because we've obviously been talking about it this whole entire video, but definitely a fair one. Next up, we have Tyler here saying, try to branch out into the community so you can grow, get to know some good players. It's amazing how much you can learn from something as simple as mocking in a team tour. Also, just play the damn game. You don't need to be in 20 plus leagues, but you gotta practice. Yep, you gotta practice and do something if you want to get good at it. And 100%, if you're around people who are better than you, you are naturally going to up your skill level to keep up. It's just how people work, right? If you're constantly around higher competition and, a competitive environment, as long as you stay around, you're also going to, do that as well. So I think that's a very good one here from Tyler. Then we have Wolves Nation here saying, have a game plan in mind. No matter how good your build is, you can't make the most of it if you don't know exactly how you lose or how you can win. And it's okay to bench your higher tier points mons every now and then if their matchup isn't favorable. Yeah, both of these are great. I always tell everybody if they're like a Salamence member, to always make sure that when you're going into the game, the first two things that you should look at are how do you win, how do you lose? And not in the sense of how do I stop myself from losing, in the sense of if I'm my opponent, what's their win con? How do I stop it? And what's my win con? I think it's a really important thing to know going in, because your whole build and your whole play should be centered around how you win, right? And if you don't do so correctly and you use your setup sweeper on turn 2 that you wanted to win and it doesn't win yet, you're probably going to lose, you know, right? So I think that's definitely a really important thing to note. And obviously benching your higher tier mons is okay. It seems weird, and sometimes you might be like, oh shit, why did they bench Palafin? Maybe Palafin had a really, really bad matchup, and you can get something more value. You can get more value out of your 7-point Pokemon on the bench, right? Definitely a fair one. Definitely a fair one. How much more do we have? Not that much, actually. We're there. Next up, we have Anders here saying it. Take team advice with a grain of salt. You're the person who spent the longest thinking about your team, so evaluate what people have to say, but don't just throw away your ideas. Look back afterwards to see if there's anything that could be improved. TLDR, stick to your guns. Yeah, a lot of times, sticking to your gut is a really important thing to do. I realize I missed a lot of these, too, liking them. I always try and like all the tweets, but I guess I missed some of these. But I think this is definitely a fair one. A lot of times you'll hear other people kind of give it from their perspective, and I think you should always adhere to other people's advice and listen to it and really critically give it an opportunity. Don't be close-minded and say, no, this is what I'm doing, so this is what I'm doing. But it's important to recognize, hey, this is what their idea is, but I really don't think this is true. I feel more comfortable with this. I think this is going to go. I think that's an important thing to do. And again, afterwards, look, maybe they were right. Or maybe you take little bits and pieces from their advice. Maybe they say, I think you should bring this because you're weak to this. Maybe you say, I don't think this is a good check or this fixes my problem, but maybe I can allocate some of the resources elsewhere. Maybe I don't have enough coverage for this defensive Pokemon. Maybe I don't have a good pivot for this. Maybe I want to resist berry on this to help me deal with that. So I think that's definitely a fair one from Anders here. And then we have Wagon Fruit here saying the capability of a mon to matchup needs to consider the flow of the game, not just how well it can hit everything or how well it can wall something. Does your breaker have realistic opportunities that help? Is your fat too passive and allow something that hurts the game plan? Yes. On paper, you can have a Pokemon like Hoopa that 2-hit KOs and OHKOs everything. But then you look at the matchup and you're like, holy shit, it's because everything is faster than me and kills me. Yeah, I might kill them, but I'm not going to get the opportunity because I can never get in viably to, click the button. Same thing with defensively. Maybe my Aloe walls X Pokemon, but it lets in X Pokemon on U-turn and it gets a free sub up. And then I'm like, oh shit, I lose. So 100% understand sequences and the flow of the game and how these Pokemon will play into each other. Does this defensive piece actually work, or does it make you weaker to something else, right? And we have Frostfire, don't play Draft League, get out while you still can. So true. Then we have May here saying, drafting around type cores is useful for absolute beginner, but you shouldn't get in the habit of building your team around them as soon as possible. Yeah, draft for roles, draft for synergy, draft for resistances, things like that, but make sure they do so correctly. Okay. Next up, we have Scribble here saying the easiest thing to fix a lot of new players run unoptimized EV spreads. Since you only need to account for your opponent's draft, you really need to run max speed on anything. So those wasted speed EVs in bulk or power. 100%. We talked about that earlier. If I have Dragapult, their fast Pokemon is itself. I'm not running timid max speed Dragapult, probably. Unless there's a Scarf for I want outspeed, right? It's just identifying that, and you'll learn that more as you play and things like that. And it really does open up a lot of Pokemon. That's why fast Pokemon are so good in draft, right? And we got David next here saying, don't slap Signal Beam in your Crossman. Think it's enough to break Cresselia. Lesson I learned from my first league 5 years ago. Again, it's a little bit more of a personal one. I do get it, though. I get the idea, right? Is making sure that super effective button isn't the way you beat everything, right? Maybe I don't break through this Pokemon with a super effective coverage. Maybe I go Toxic on my Necrozma instead, because it puts that crest on a timer. It doesn't let us set 15 million Calm Minds and beat me. Right? Then we have Delta saying, how does a new and growing content creator join a draft league? This isn't, I'll give you an answer. This isn't necessarily the point of the Twitter thread. I think content-wise, if you want to join Wi-Fi leagues, it's just reaching out to different league owners and finding D leagues and things like that, YouTube leagues, uploading, getting a resume, applying, and just getting it done. It's not super... I would say it's not super difficult. It's definitely hard to get your footing in the scene. But it's just uploading things and building a resume and saying people saying oh, this guy is for real. He means business. He's putting in effort, and then you'll get in leagues, right? Whew. All right. Next up, we have Sun here saying mock battles can be useful at identifying gaps in prep, but they also have you seeing ghosts. Take note of odd sets in prep if you can, but don't lose sight of standard sets because you got it once in the mocks. Yes, don't tunnel vision your mocks. When I mock Amel, I might get cooked by, I was mocking Amel for a team tour that we were playing in, and I was getting cooked by Iron Defense, Leech Seed, Terra Fairy, Torterra. Like, absolutely getting cooked by it nonstop. I killed like 6 Pokemon in the span of 30 minutes and like 6 mocks. I was getting smoked. I didn't think that set was coming. I wanted to make sure I had counterplay and had a path around a set like that, but I was still prepared for Shell Smash Torterra. And that's what ended up coming to the game, I think. So I think that is definitely very, very important, is using it as a means of seeing what's wrong with your team, but not seeing it as a battle before the battle, right? Your opponent is going to have a completely different perspective from your friend who was helping you with a mock battle. That's not a bad thing. It's just they might not bring the same thing or have the same thought process, right? Next up, we have Caden saying, knowing how to lead is important. I'm thinking new players will often default to leading with either a Hazard or a Scarfmon. Neither of these are inherently wrong, but I think it's important to not have your mindset on a single lead option. You need to go into the game and be willing to adapt your lead based on the opponent's team. As good as leading with Hazard is also predictable. Don't rush your lead. Take a good look at their team and determine what's best for the specific matchup. So, I agree and disagree with how this is set. I do think that you should have a lead going in. You should not lead a Pokemon because it is a Hazard setter or it's a Scarfer or whatever, but you should lead a Pokemon that puts you in an advantageous position versus everything. Again, what I always tell Salamis members, how I tell them to approach matchups they're having trouble with and I'm helping them build. Identify your win con, identify your opponent's win con, tell me your lead, and tell me the first 3 turns of the game, right? Identify what their likely leads are, how you lead well into that. Identify what you do if you get a disadvantageous lead. If they lead X thing that is unexpected, you have pass out into other things. So it's not even necessarily that you have to have a Pokemon that leads well into all 12 of your opponents. But the things you don't lead well into, you should be able to deal with functionally outside of it. You don't want to lead yourself into a bad spot. But I think a very important thing as you get better is understanding the lead matchup is very, very important. So I agree and disagree here with Caden. Then we have Sark Techie here saying, joined a draft league for the first time in August. It's honestly been so fun. I'm definitely still learning, but I would say try building cores while balancing speed tiers. It's challenging, but doing practice draft really helps. Yeah, and we see right here, the next one from Marcelo here is speed tiers. Having good gaps in your speed tiers to make sure that your opponent isn't able to run adamant, modest stuff versus you is really important. It's a really different feeling playing against a timid Nidoking and a modest Nidoking, right? And it can make a ton of difference in your defensive calcs and prep and play and things like that. If you don't have proper speed tiers, it can get pretty messy. Next up, we have Solar Beam here saying, for new players, I think it's easy to fall in the trap of trying to evaluate mons purely on how good they are in singles and then taking trap mons that are they think are underpriced. They have to learn to evaluate mons by how hard they are to prepare for and how flexible they can be. I think this is a better way of putting this, and I think this is what Solar Beam means here, is like understanding the different viability of Smog singles versus like draft, right? And again, I think I've made 2 videos on it at this point. Different Pokemon are better in each format because of different strengths. Mons and Smogon are going to be better when they have a very over-centralizing single set that fits well into their niche and role in the metagame. Whereas draft Pokemon typically thrive when they can do multiple things very well. Now they need to have something that they're very good at, but they also have other options that they can flex into very often at the time. So Pokemon like Thundurus are much better in draft than they are in Smogon because they're very, very versatile in in that regard, as a South Sweeper, as a Breaker, as utility, as a Thunder Waver, and like a ton of different things that they can do well. And then we have Ace here with the last one of the day, saying the biggest mistake I made when I was team building is not having good structure. Your team should always have a win con no matter what. The rest of your team should be built around supporting that win con to actually win. Breakers, bulky mons to keep your team long and alive enough, etc. Yeah, again, how do I win? What is my best mode of winning? How do I make it to where this Pokemon wins? And how do I stop my opponent from beating me before I win, right? You should always be looking at how you win, not how you lose, but ensuring that you don't lose is an important thing. So, yeah, that's going to be the thread. I actually got through this one pretty fast. Only 42 minutes. I thought it was going to take me way longer to get through this, but let me know what you guys think. If you have any advice for players and you didn't comment on this thread in the on Twitter, go ahead and drop it in the comments below. Let me know if you guys have any questions too. And yeah, with that being said, thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys in the next one. Later.